Hey, you guys good? You all wearing masks and washing your hands and sneezing into your arms and avoiding large crowds during this COVID craziness? Yeah? All right, good. Welcome back to Movie Monday. Thank you all for joining me. Back in March, when coronavirus first took hold in what I will now probably forever call the before times, I was coming up with an elite 8 of movies to pair with March Madness. Though definitely not a complete list, the point of the video was to discuss some of the greatest films ever made and why they are near perfect. Secondly, I wanted to cover a genre that I personally find the most compelling. Well, 3. Thrillers, crime, and neo-westerns. I think some don't get mentioned enough and others get mentioned to death, which I'm totally going to mention. It pained me to keep it as short as 8, and I did have a sweet 16, but whittling it down also forced me to think a lot more carefully about how and why any of us like films. I do an elite 8 of 2019 movies, but I have to be honest, I was rarely wowed. I thought Jojo Rabbit was great, but any plot based in World War II is about as easy a start as I can imagine for not just screenwriters, but for the Academy to throw awards at every year. That being said, I'm glad Parasite won as it clearly earned the title, but I didn't see enough movies dominate the year to even come up with 8. Maybe next time. And since this movie year has been cut short into a hand-sewn mask, leavened into a bread maker, and doused with hand sanitizer, I'm going to cover these films. And please feel free to tell me if you agree or disagree with the list. First, let's get started with some super honorable mentions that didn't make the list, but I recommend for anyone who's looking to increase their appreciation and understanding of film overall. These are of an all-time nature, so don't get whiplash between the years, but do consider these your start to any understanding of westerns or film noir, which really come down to a mix of crime, thriller, and suspenseful storytelling. Touch of Evil. If anyone could make a flawless film, it was Orson Welles. This movie is a must for any film lover, film student, and is as influential to storytelling, screenwriting, and directing as a film could ever be. Its opening sequence has been analyzed, reshot, re-edited, reframed, analyzed again, and discussed for 2 generations, going on 3. The Searchers. John Ford was an influential and possibly the most adored director of all time. A Time magazine film critic recently described it as a darkly profound story of obsession, racism, and heroic solitude. It's hands down a Western classic and continues to speak to people in different ways regarding photography and themes alike. The Long Goodbye. A neo-noir story about the end of an era, it satirizes the societal differences between the 1950s, when the original bogey version of Philip Marlowe was solving crimes by way of femme fatales and arrogant criminals, and the way Elliot Gould's version syncopates that with a postmodern feel. Its authenticity solidifies the neo-noir film in America and is an underrated gem even for today's standards. The Departed. A fairly newly minted, adapted bit of perfection, it teaches directors the world over what to take out or leave in. Ultimately, it's a story about 2 men lifted from the original 2002 Hong Kong film Infernal Affairs. If you have time, watch both of them for a cross-disciplinary lesson in storytelling and adaptation. Shaun of the Dead. Now you might say, how in the hell does Shaun of the Dead fit into any of those categories? Well, if a thriller counts as one that keeps you on the edge of your seat and has elements of suspense and excitement, who says it can't also be a zombie movie? And a comedy? And a buddy flick? No one. Edgar Wright's 2004 Zomcom uses parallel satire and homage. It's self-aware of zombie tropes and still thoroughly absorbing and witty with the acknowledgments therein. And as the only comedy on the list, I couldn't exactly include it in the Elite 8, but it is hilarious and sincere and probably worth of its own Movie Monday at a later time. With those out of the way, the following Elite 8 movies took extra time to be extra good and deserve your attention. Let's get started. Heat. Written, produced, and directed by Michael Mann, the 1995 flick starred Robert De Niro and Al Pacino on screen together for the first time since Godfather 2. And due to their roles in that film, this was actually the first time they shared screen time in the same scene. In the simplest terms, it's the story of a long-careered criminal, his crew, and the police detective who's trying to stop them. The plot moves forward very thematically, very theatrically, and is a masterclass of screenwriting, blocking, editing, and sound. The entire movie was shot on location throughout Los Angeles and actually became an inspiration for how Christopher Nolan shot The Dark Knight, primarily for sequences in Chicago, but also spots near London and Hong Kong. Perhaps the most famous scene is the main bank heist midway through the film. The sound may be the best ever recreated, and certainly for the time. Every bullet fired, every casing expelled, every broken piece of glass, reload, and footstep is tracked perfectly and provides a very realistic element to the story. And if anyone is in doubt of the balance and ferocity of the sequence, listen to the ricochets. No movie before it provided such high dynamic sound quality to the overall feel of a scene, and pretty much everyone copied it thereafter. They knew it when they saw it, and especially when they heard it, that it was a superior model of how practical a shootout could be exhibited. I don't know anyone who saw this when it first came out and was not shocked, amazed, on the edge of their seat, and terrified all at the same time. The Way of the Gun is a Christopher McQuarrie film that came out in 2000. In case you don't know who Christopher McQuarrie is, he won the Oscar for the screenplay The Usual Suspects, and other than The Way of the Gun is responsible for Jack Reacher, the last two Mission Impossible movies, and is one of the writers for the June 2020 release of Top Gun Maverick. So along the action drama or crime drama lines, he knows what he's doing. Critics had mixed reviews about The Way of the Gun because what they called exciting resurgence of genre pulp. They were overwhelmed with Tarantino wannabes. So the release was underwhelming to say the least. Since then, it's the first-class dialogue, clever action sequences, and ensemble that have made it a cult classic. Juliette Lewis and her father Jeffrey actually both star in it, separated completely by character arcs, but nearly 100 years worth of acting between them helps lift the only two not perfect actors in this whole movie. Short of Ty Diggs and Nicky Katt, who are actually not that bad, there remain the three most important actors to this film's longevity of recognition. Ryan Philippe, whose narration and first lines of the movie may be the best of his entire catalog. Benicio del Toro, who displays my favorite performance of his, even more so than The Usual Suspects, and yes, even Sicario, but back to him in a bit. This leaves James Caan, the main antagonist of the film. A bit of an anti-hero in a supportive role, and without a doubt the most confident of all the characters and probably actors of the project. When I look back to his storied career, I think of this and less of The Godfather, sacrilege as that may be. He's back in 2000 what Mike Ehrmantraut became in early 2009. A cleaner, a fixer, a tenured badass with all the answers and zero doubt about him. He's exacting and unapologetic as he is relentless. And here's a link to the last film, the bagman scene where Caan meets Del Toro and tries to convince him to go the other way, to get out of the life. They both explain who they are, what they've always been, and what they'll be until the day they die. Look familiar? It's about as mirrored a scene as one can get with Pacino and De Niro's characters meeting in the coffee shop in Heat. It's intense, and as common as a device as it may be, make no mistake, there are many ways to mess this up. What Heat and The Way of the Gun get so right is the pretext to the meeting, the civility and calm in an otherwise chaotic storyline, and the resolution of inevitability. If you overact or underact, overdirect, overstylize, or overedit, you lose the fragility of the moment. In a moment when anything can happen, the restraint from doing so provides a deeper experience and a more defined tension. It makes the story much richer. A Perfect World. Clint Eastwood has one movie above all others that is severely underrated. Say what you want about Million Dollar Baby, Mystic River, or Bridges of Madison County, it's A Perfect World that stands out as one of his most profound and far less reviewed. Any director makes stylistic choices for his story, his actors, and his themes. In a delicate show of how violence and psychology can shape certain people, it's not a story about all of us. It features a Jehovah's Witness child, Philip, an escaped convict who was wrongly accused and sentenced anyway, and an old-timer Texas Ranger who had a part in it. The best part of the movie is the unconventionality and message that comes from what seems logical and formulaic, though it winds up being anything but. Ego assumed for one character is ego actuated in another. What we're told will appear as a manhunt of tact and precision is actually fairly mundane and remains centered to a small patch of Texas. Though a gun is present in almost every scene of the film, we never actually see the violence of it going off. Instead of laughter to break some of the more serious parts of the film, there are bits of soft amusement. Think of it as the difference between stand-up sets of Sam Kinison and Jerry Seinfeld. Instead of crying laughing, you slightly upturn one corner of your mouth to indicate mild enjoyment. You think the whole story is about an adult, but really it's about kids. Our kids, your kids, kids past, kids present, kids future. It's a big message to us adults. Be an example to your kids. Be good to kids, especially in their youth. Forgive them for not being adults yet. Forgive yourself for not having been a better kid. It's my favorite movie for this kind of atypical social exercise, and I think anyone would be hard-pressed to find another so emotionally captured by Kevin Costner and the young T.J. Lowther. Out of the Furnace. Back in the haze and brain code days of Hollywood, the bad guy almost always lost and always had to lose for reasons of ethical grounding for the population at hand. Crime and immorality could never be portrayed in a positive light. Drug use and nudity were forbidden, and religion or any moral practices could not be mocked in any way. Enter Out of the Furnace, where all of these are the entire basis of the film, and until the very end savagely push and push until we, the audience, are about to break. It covers PTSD and what it means to be a combat veteran who has no real future back home, and shines a light on what we believe is the American dream. When it comes down to it, though, Out of the Furnace makes and breaks tension like the difference between delicately creating a door on a miniature house and using explosives to open said door. As we approach the end of the movie, we're praying for relief from 2 hours of buildup. It's released in less than an extraordinary fashion, and we question why we wanted such a violent catharsis and quickly remember how badly the villain deserved it. But it still feels hollow somehow. We're still not satisfied. And that may be the point of this flick. It's nihilistic from beginning to end. Everyone is harmed by the sequence of events in all 3 acts. The protagonist figures out more about himself in the beginning of the film than he does by the end. The supporting characters don't help our protagonist in any meaningful way. And some of those we see as allies turn out to pile on the obstacles from our antagonist in many parts of the movie. It's disheartening, it's depressing, but it's still exhilarating. You leave wondering why you liked it so much, but somehow feel exhausted and dirty. We see a struggle for normalcy, and the very blatant dichotomy here is Russell Bayes will never find a normal or healthy existence. But nothing in his world is really normal or healthy from the beginning. He's no longer an alcoholic by the end, but he's literally gotten away with murder, and to what end? Revenge isn't the winning it was back in old Hollywood, and the audience is stirred by the same revulsion of reality Russell is at the film's conclusion. The bad guy has basically won. No one is redeemed by the action. Ethical grounding has not begun. Crime will not cease, and immorality will still flourish, where our very lives are as expendable as the coal upon which the characters rely. The whole story is a lesson bookended by Pearl Jam's song Release, a song Eddie Vedder re-recorded to express even more pain, regret, confusion, and injustice as the movie portrays. All in all, Out of the Furnace deconstructs a typical Hollywood revenge flick to exhibit the uselessness of all forms of villainy, violence, vulnerability, and vengeance in a world that's hard enough to navigate when all things go well. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, and if I haven't ruined it for you completely with spoilers, I definitely suggest a watch, even if it's just an amazing cast you want to see that will absolutely demolish your heart and expectations for 2 hours. Sicario. There are far too many video blogs and essays out there on this film, so I won't bore you with any glam and grandeur about what a great movie this is. You've either seen it, or you haven't, or you want to, and you haven't, and never will. But let me say this. Denis Villeneuve is responsible for hit after hit, acclaim after acclaim, award after award. We'll see about Doom. But he is exalted by his critics because he is good at what he does. Sicario is masterful for not only the action scenes, but the attention to characters' development, or in the case of Emily Blunt, breakdown, and is nothing less than vigilant about shooting movies the way audience view and hear them best. Ask any photographer what they think of Arrival, Incendies, or Sicario, and if they're worth their weight, they'll have to agree with the audacity and appreciation Villeneuve has for a good lens. That same attention to detail is pushed hard on with the actors to make for beats like this.
¿Qué quieres?
No moment is too raw, too quiet, or too awkward. It's what the story demands and what the audience need to truly flesh out the desires and needs of the characters. The music is mostly reserved, cautious, but also other times gigantic and nerve-wracking. Jóhann Jóhannsson was an Icelandic composer who received an Oscar nod for his work on this film, but unfortunately died at 48 of complications from drugs and medication. He was an enthusiastic collaborator and was recognized widely for the unique score he provided for the film. The music just adds to an already ridiculously good movie, and if you have any real questions about it, I recommend watching it a few times. I've seen this movie about 20 times, once back to back, because it speaks something different to me every time I see it. Hamlet reads this way as well. My first viewing, I hated almost every character, but then I saw things more and more from their perspective. Josh Brolin's character in particular is more of a badass every time I watch it. He's salty and brutal, but very necessarily realistic for all the matters in his field. What he lacks in charm, he makes up for in expertise. Where others sway with legalities, he gets a job done as effectively and efficiently as possible. He has no hard feelings and sees collateral damage and human failure as part of the plan. Del Toro, however, is death incarnate. Blunt is rebirth. Even the cities of Mexico are their own characters of where people and emotions go to die or begin anew. If you haven't yet, just watch it already. There's a reason your perpetually single neighbor with the cats asks you if you've seen it every time you pass them in the stairwell. The Wild Bunch is my favorite movie of all time. Unfortunately, I can't show any clips of it due to copyright claims, but it is one of the greatest westerns of all time, so please watch it. Mel Gibson is actually doing a remake of it. He's been trying since 2018 to do that. The whole thing has been in the works since 2011. I can't wait to see it, but definitely check out the original from Warner Brothers, 1969, directed by Sam Peckinpah. No Country for Old Men. Don't worry, I'm going to skip right over this one. There are way too many video essays about scene direction, camera choices, music, acting, screenwriting, lighting, and existential quandaries about human life, animal death, costuming, and editing. There is nothing I can add to the catalog of the praise for this film, but I have to say I agree with almost all of it, and so it gets a second place spot, and now we're moving on. There Will Be Blood is as close to perfection as I can imagine a movie being, and could actually never have imagined this movie at all. I may be the worst person with whom to watch a movie. I see things coming way too soon and can spoil any special moment, a moment all romantic comedy fans wait for with bated breath, by saying the line right before the main hero or heroine say it. And I see a thriller and generally know who done it or where the come-uppance shall shine pretty early on. If this power or curse I have does anything, it allows me to weed through some pretty obvious drivel in the previews. A PG-rated action thriller? Nah, I'm good. A period piece? Probably not. Anything sequel-ish? Not for $1 quadrillion. So why is this one number one? Why is it the grand champion of this month's Movie Monday? The holiest of holies? Pick something. Anything to critique in a negative light, and I assure you it will fail under argument. Pick a single sequence in the movie that was unnecessary. Pick a shot or angle that was inappropriate or distracting in any sense. Pick a line of dialogue or beat that was unsuitable for the moment. You just can't do it. Now, this doesn't mean some people can't not like it. Art is subjective by its very nature. It matters how it makes you feel. Avengers Endgame, Avatar, Titanic are the top 3 highest grossing films of all time, and not one of them comes close to a perfect film. Even if you don't nitpick continuity errors and other minutiae, all 3 have large problems that turned away some audiences. I loved Titanic when it came out, but that being said, I was all of 17 and had little gumption to seek out criticism from Variety. What makes this movie stand out is the near zero functional criticism from the usual people. I say functional along the lines of how I put it to you, dear viewers. Find me a single element of dysfunction within the story. There isn't one. One critic on Rotten Tomatoes says this is a film by Paul Thomas Anderson that has overshot the runway of movie modernity with something thrillingly, dangerously new. I think that sums it up. It's not what you were expecting, it's not what you might even want in a film, but it's because it's new. If we're all being honest, don't we just stay with bad familiar because maybe a fear of the unknown new? We could even adjust that too. If I'm telling you this is a perfect movie, would you believe me? And what if you did? It's too high a bar to reach, and here's an unfortunate paradox. What's the first thing you think of when you hear The Wire or Breaking Bad? Everyone never shut up about it. You saw it, and you thought it was good, but probably not up to the level that everyone said it was. This is that, but without the need to build it up too much. It is nearly perfect, and the only reason I don't say it is to leave room for improvement I can't possibly fathom. It's the same goosebumps I got when I saw Truman Burbank check out a spotlight that fell from the sky, or when Christoph, having almost killed Truman, tell him that there is no more truth in the real world, and that by staying in his artificial world, he would have nothing to fear. There Will Be Blood is not the, but an answer to that safety in films. Paul Thomas Anderson had a great vision for the movie. Daniel Day-Lewis, as a method actor, has a capacity for consolidating and parading the widest and darkest of human emotions. And cinematographer Robert Elswit left us oftentimes feeling a bit agoraphobic by the danger of the outside. It's vast and wide and lonely and requires courage to occupy. Manifest Destiny and capitalism came to those willing and ready to grit through it and become pioneers of innovation, often the most ruthless and cutthroat ways possible. That is an answer to a question. Can a film's protagonist and antagonist and setting and plot and themes all be the same thing? In There Will Be Blood, it kind of is. It feels very real, even historical. It highlights the most common enemy of humanity, but is the unique friend of invention. Greed, selfishness. It's Nietzsche and Ayn Rand. It's actually whatever you want it to be or need it to be. It's nearly inflexible in its individual pieces, but very malleable with its message. If you need it to be a story about family, it's that. Money, definitely about that. Fortitude, throughout the entire film. It's received the highest grade I can give, but as the even bigger cineast at CinemaSins would say, no movie is without sin. But if this movie has any flaws, they are ostensibly invisible to the excellence that is its form, script, subtext, and direction. So none of these films are just about the suspense. They're sizable exemplifications of what maintains audiences' attention because they incorporate intensity with visual cues and leave out what too many other movies leave in as low-hanging fruit. It's the hackneyed dialogue, contrived motivations, or even worse, one-dimensional characters. Every scene has a consequence and a catalyst for the inevitabilities to come, but thrillers, crime films, and neo-westerns do the opposite of what is easy. It's easy to show bad people doing bad things. It's much harder either showing good people doing bad things or bad people doing good things. I don't think making horror films is easy, and I'm not discounting them at all, but it's far easier to show how a bunch of people die and the lone figure is trying to kill them, as opposed to illustrating how each character is trying to stay alive or thrive. As the audience, if we're the characters, the payoff in a horror is to outsmart or get away from the killer. Even by the end, they are the embodiment of everything cruel and scary about the world. The payoff in a thriller is to outsmart or get away from yourself. Horror movie villains usually couldn't actually exist in the universe in a million years. A thriller or neo-western could happen in this world in your neck of the woods today. So I hope you enjoyed this movie Monday. I know it's a lot to take in, but consider watching these as a starter pack to some real film appreciation. Next movie Monday, we'll be looking at reinvention and what that means when it comes to sports movies. Thanks for watching. This has been Ample Thought.